welcome to another episode of The Future Current. I'm your host, Sean Swentek. Today I'm joined by Brandon Conard and Steve Maloney, Director Asset Management, both from SolRiver Capital. They're joining me today from beautiful Colorado. Brandon and Steve, thanks for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Both of you have extensive experience in this industry and have worked across all aspects of PV, site development, operations, and I'm sure beyond PV into BESS probably more recently. But as we think about PV specifically, what are the most difficult parts of asset management for PV assets?
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult parts right now is identifying the root cause of problems, especially in asset management and why things are failing.
Yeah, getting to that root cause and not just like putting a Band-Aid over the same issue time and again is I know what frustrates a lot of asset owners out there. When that solar project is underperforming, what have you discovered is often the real culprit that maybe people aren't talking about or are not clued into what's really causing a lot of the issues on these sites?
I think a common culprit is extended downtime and the time it takes to actually repair a lot of these issues that we're seeing on sites.
They're not like necessarily the same issue over and over, but just getting the equipment for whatever the issue is and getting it replaced. I think that official time delay is actually the biggest cause of underperformance.
That's interesting. I think when we think about underperformance of sites, we always break it into the different aspects of like, at what point do you actually realize through monitoring that there's an issue? And then how long does it take to diagnose that issue? And then to your point, once it's diagnosed and you know what it is to fix it, there's this backlog sometimes for the parts you need to actually make that repair. Now, speaking of monitoring and being able to understand those issues on your sites, especially remotely, so you're not having to pay to roll a truck every time to understand, how have data and technology, and maybe how does SolRiver embrace data and technology to change the way you manage renewable energy assets versus maybe 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, I think today it's a lot easier to identify the DC health issues with drone scans. There are so many new drone scan helpers now, it's hard to keep track of them, but I think they're doing a great job and it's made our lives a lot easier on the asset management side.
Yeah, the drone in a box I'm seeing everywhere. Feels like that makes up a big part of the boost at these trade shows these days. What about the other? There's a lot of other sort of robotic elements that are coming into play, even robots that'll do vegetation management and panel cleaning and things like that. Have you looked into any of those functionalities? Is that on the roadmap or is that just feel like too far out in the future for y'all?
I think at the moment we haven't spent too much time focused on vegetation with robotics and robotic module cleaning, but it's something we've seen at the booths and at conferences. So we're aware that that's something to pay attention to in the next 5-10 years.
I always check them out, and the problem I've seen with them so far is they don't have enough horsepower. So, if you want to send them out after you mow the lawn to have them mow the lawn again, it could work. But a lot of times we're kind of discovering, it's already 3-4 feet high. I wouldn't trust those things to tackle that kind of vegetation.
Yeah, 100%. I've even seen photos of sites where we're not even just talking grass. There's like trees and bushes growing through these modules, which I don't think these robots are going to be able to take on. So it's a good call out. Speaking of the need for monitoring remote solutions, SolRiver manages assets coast to coast. How do you do that with such like a small but mighty team? And then how do geography and sort of regionality impact the way you run your business and the way you manage your assets?
I would say we really focus on process. We have built out a sort of daily process of tracking the DAS and gone from a sort of passive owner to very hyperactive owner, paying attention to it. So we've got a lot of protocols around that. And I guess data, like from the coast to coast perspective, like you want to share sort of what we do on like the weather side and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, just to Brandon's point, I think we're a lot more hands-on as an owner than where we would be 5 years ago. We're managing projects in all these different regions. We'll do owner site visits and check in on how these sites actually look in the field. We pay a lot of progress with cameras and monitoring the sites remotely to kind of capture as much as we can from our desk here in Denver.
But it's not just that. It's building in the process that it's like, hey, somebody's got to look at the camera at least once a week.
Right.
Every site.
That feels like a smart thing to do. Give me a feel for your sites in your portfolio. Are we talking mostly ground mount? Do we have some rooftop mixed in there? What's the size of your portfolio? Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about as we think about the way you assess this?
It's about 200 megawatts and entirely ground mount, small utility scale connected distribution grid. A lot of QFs, community solar, some bilateral projects with towns and whatnot. But average project size is about 7 megawatts, kind of ranges between 2 and 20 megawatts.
Got it. Got it. A lot of the folks that I talk to that play in that small utility space, sort of the big topic these days is data centers and their need for energy and the prospect of solar and or battery storage helping to fill that need. Is that a place that you're starting to explore more, Steve?
We're exploring it. We haven't built any projects for data center yet, but I think it's something we're actively reading about and staying up to speed about.
Got it. And Brandon, you mentioned community solar. Is that play a big part in your current portfolio or maybe in the future portfolio? I know like certain states have great regulation around that and others not so much. I don't know how that growth opportunity looks there for you for community solar.
I'd say community solar's maybe only 10 to 15% of our portfolio. So not huge, not an unimportant part. And we're very, very interested in acquiring more communities, but it's not a huge part of what we do.
Got it. A lot of the folks I talk to who are operating in community solar talk about the subscriber acquisition and management being a kind of more difficult part of that. Is that something you deal with, or are you able to find partners that support you in that effort?
We outsource that right now, but I would say similar to kind of our evolution on the system performance side, we are learning that we need to be a more active participant in managing our subscription managers.
Fair, fair. So SolRiver today operates really as an IPP. You're owning and operating your assets. I know you have experience on more early stage development and even financing projects. What is the biggest misconception maybe like early stage developers or financiers have about what it really takes once a project comes online to keep that project operational and producing the energy and the revenue that's expected of it?
One thing I think is kind of funny, and I don't know if you mean to phrase your question this way, but if you're asking what do developers think, because we oftentimes buy projects from developers and then we bring it from kind of their late stage all the way to shovel ready.
Yep.
Something I've noticed about developers over the years is they really underestimate in their designs and layouts a lot of what goes into construction. So they don't include enough access roads. They don't include setbacks for the tractor to get around every single row to, to do the vegetative management. They don't include enough basins for, stormwater runoff, et cetera. So we always have to kind of take whatever their layouts are and give it to our EPC partners and say, okay, redo this in a way that can actually be built, which usually ends up decreasing the system size and value. I think we've had to do it on literally every project we've bought.
So there's generally a little bit of an inclination to overestimate what's possible on a single site as far as building out the production they would like to model versus what's really possible operationally for long term with that asset.
Yep.
Frustrating, I'm sure. Now, you mentioned earlier, Brandon, that you are looking to acquire sites sometime. It's not just that you're building your own sites, obviously. When you're assessing a site or a portfolio of sites, is there a certain metric that tells you whether that site or that portfolio is going to be a profitable long-term investment and will succeed or fail? Are there indicators that you really look out for as you're analyzing a site or a portfolio?
I don't think there's one single metric, but SolRiver will look at the unlevered lifetime return and the cash on cash yield as pretty important metrics for us.
But I think that you can't just treat them as a monolith. There's not a single attribute, because a huge part of kind of what we do is, especially if you're talking about acquiring, operating projects or whatnot, we're very good at kind of looking at the system, identifying what its issues are, and then coming up with a plan to kind of improve that. So any metric you want to point to as important, if it's hurting the value of the project, we've often got a solution to address that.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that was a big part of your business. The topic of repowering in general and beyond what maybe people historically thought when they thought of repowering is like only end of life rebuilding of systems. But there's this concept now with the advancements in systems and how much more they can produce with newer components. People are talking about repowering earlier in an asset's lifespan. Is that something that you're doing actively on your portfolio or when you're acquiring sites?
Yes.
What do you think the future is for repowering and renewable energy? It feels like a pretty big opportunity given we're starting to see a lot of assets hit that 10, 15, 20-year mark.
Well, it's funny. It's a really complex analysis that we're now, for a while it was just sort of part of the model, and now we're trying to implement it. And there's a lot of engineering that goes into it of how do you not only what equipment are you buying, how are you reconfiguring inverters, transformers, strings, etc., to contemplate whatever you're doing to add capacity to the system or enhance performance. So it's a lot more complicated and it's very side by side.
Yeah. Every conversation I'm having about that is that exact topic. It's way more complicated than people realize, and you got to have some trusted partners when you're engaging in that. I'm just realizing I just itched my face. MLK Day was earlier this week, and my daughters were home from school, and we did a nail painting session. So for those watching on video wondering why Sean's nails are painted this week, that is why. Jumping back into the questions, obviously you have investors in Soul River. Investors are looking for return on capital, sometimes over a shorter time span than the life of a system. How do you balance, the pressure to drive short-term returns from an asset with the reality that solar investments are for the life of an asset, and that asset is often a 10, 15, 20-year lifespan?
My initial thought is I think we invest in system upgrades earlier on.
Mm.
So we'll pay attention to, making inverter upgrades or replacements and those type of investments earlier in its life, knowing that we'll have longer term returns as the operating life goes on.
So it's safe to say Soul River's taking the long-term perspective and is not looking to turn a quick buck on these assets. That's refreshing in our industry. I love to hear that. What is happening right now, has happened in the last year, you believe will happen with some of the policy changes that's going to sort of fundamentally change the finance around renewable energy projects?
Well, lost with tax credit.
Yeah. Obviously the big elephant in the room. How are you thinking about that, Brandon? How does Soul River navigate that change?
We're fairly conservative, so we're kind of following it by the buck. We don't use some of the more questionable approaches as safe harbor projects. So we're just kind of looking for things that are down the fairway. If somebody's got an opportunity that's got it down the fairway to play, they've taken traditional means to begin work on the site. We're super interested in that. But right now, we're watching the market, trying to stay up with it.
One of the ways some folks are pivoting is that the ITC is sticking around for battery storage. Is that going to become a bigger part of your asset management philosophy or your development philosophy?
Absolutely. And I think it's true for everyone, but we've been working on the storage for at least 2 years now. We've done a number of sort of development capital investments that are funding storage development. And so we've been participating in that market for a while. We don't have anything operational yet, but we were glad that we had done that once, the law changed, because we were at least able to, continue to participate in the direction the market is signaling.
Yeah. And obviously, over the past few years, we've seen a lot in utility scale storage. I know you all do a lot of DG solar. Are you seeing an uptick in DG battery storage? Is that on the commercial side? Is that starting to kind of catch up with utility yet?
Yeah, it's funny. When we started the company, one of the philosophies that we had was we were going to, so we viewed every single project would eventually become solar and storage. Having a battery on a solar project would be like having an inverter on a solar project. And so the technology wasn't quite there when we started. So we left a couple acres we try to leave a couple acres on every single site to add a battery to. And that has become a really smart decision on our part. 'Cause now we've got a lot of efforts exploring whether or not it's now time to add those batteries.
That's huge. That was smart thinking, and it's you might even be benefiting more on the back end because the amount that they can pack into a single container now is pretty incredible. You know, we've went from 1, 2, 3 megawatts in a container up to like 18 on some of these newer developments. So pretty incredible at what you'll be able to get into that space you save. So smart thinking on your part. Brandon or Steve, rather. This one might be for you. When you're looking at those portfolios, like we were talking about earlier, are there certain red flags that you keep an eye out for when you're doing an assessment of an asset or a portfolio? Like, is there design characteristics or components or geography where you're like, oh, this could signal some trouble in this area?
Yeah, there's a number of things we look at. I think the biggest red flag that jumps out when I'm looking at a portfolio is extended periods of downtime. So if something's been offline for 6 months or more than 6 months, it raises a lot of questions, a lot of red flags. Who the manufacturer is, what the RMA process is like, what the contractor relationship is like. So downtime loss in general, I think is the biggest red flag.
Are there certain consistent causes of that extended downtime that you found that you can kind of guess is going to be the case most of the time?
I'd say no. Again, every single project has kind of its own story, and so when we're looking at that, we'll dive in to kind of operational logs and calculate, how much of this is due to the system versus due to external factors, like if was it due to the utility work on our substation, something like that. It's really hard to draw just consistent patterns. I mean, there's a few transformer manufacturers, we won't name names, that if we see that, we know, okay, we need to budget for that. There's a few central inverters that we know, okay, those have consistent serial defects. We are going to need a budget replacing all of that.
And having access to that data and that institutional knowledge is really powerful for you. So that's excellent. You know, in past conversations, Brandon, this reminds me of this topic. We've talked about the idea of O&M and asset management and how sometimes there's too much emphasis on the M in the O&M, and you remind people that the O is equally, if not more important. Can you talk a little bit about that and your thoughts around what it means to effectively operate an asset so that maybe you don't have to depend so much on the unexpected M?
I guess what I mean by that is there is just so much other work that goes into being an homeowner. And having done this for nearly a decade, we've just had to fight so many random battles that people don't think about that like go into owning solar. So you once get a call like, hey, there's all these cows on the site. Get rid of the cows, or we have to fight, property tax battles where a county like all of a sudden is like, hey, you owe a bunch of tax. It's like, no, we don't. We have an agreement. It says, now we have to engage with them and show them why they're wrong. Or and this actually happens a lot. We have a lot of landowners that pass away where we're leasing land. And now there's, issues between the heirs and having to kind of like talk through that. Just so many things that go into being the owner. And then there's also opportunities. It's not always bad. There's, we're constantly like for ways to, new programs to jump into, like there's certain jurisdictions that have grants or different kinds of property tax regimes if you do a certain thing. So we're always on the hunt for that, trying to shift to take advantage of those kinds of programs. And then of course you have to watch the watchers. So, there's a huge component of tracking what the various contractors are doing on the site, making sure they're doing a good job. But I would say that that's not even the majority of our time. The majority of our time is all this other stuff that goes into owning a project, making sure all the stakeholders are happy.
If I'm one of those listeners who's in the process of launching their new IPP and is flush with capital, that answer probably scared me a little, and I'm probably looking to get in a room with you, Brandon, to pick your brain. Because there's so much that goes into, and it's institutional knowledge learned over time. Probably some mistakes along the way that you're not going to repeat again. And so it's so valuable to have that information. So appreciate that inside look. As you think about, the other side of that coin, or really the overarching piece, that asset management, if you think full scope end-to-end asset management, from all the financial asset management and the operations to the technical asset management and the monitoring to the maintenance and the O&M, how does Soul River attack that? Is it a lot of companies I talk to, they think of it as like a build versus buy decision. Do we hire a bunch of people in-house and have a huge asset management team and try to do all this under our own control? Or do we piece it out and have people and vendors and partners who help us, execute on certain parts of this? How do you subscribe in that like build versus buy scenario at Soul River?
I think we try and do as much as we can in-house with the team that we have, and then strike a balance with outsourcing things that we're not as experienced in. So we'll dive into root cause analysis and exhaust the resources that are available to us to figure out the cause of a problem. But if we need to, we'll go out into the market and see who can help us.
When it comes to getting beyond the monitoring and then the diagnosis of the issue into the actual maintenance, obviously more and more solar is being built every day. There's a real workplace and labor shortage that's happening in our industry, especially for like the highest quality technicians. Are you starting to see that as you go to the market for those O&M services? Is it becoming a pinch point, or are you feeling pretty confident in like the ability for the maintenance to scale as your portfolios grow?
The technicians are out there. They are busy.
Yeah.
So we have to take that into account, but they are out there. So it can totally scale. You just have to have your network of folks you work with that, will take your call and respond to your issue.
Yeah. I'm constantly out there like talking to young people being like, you got to get into the trades in renewable. I've been in the industry a while. Brandon, you remember when like wind technicians became like one of the best paying, fastest growing jobs in America because just no one knew how to do it. And it was the opportunity. I think the same thing's happening in solar and will be with battery storage. So more people we can get into this space that are skilled and able to service these assets, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Definitely.
Speaking of, if someone's trying to break into the development of renewable energy assets, what's the most like undervalued skill you think, Brandon, that you would like advise a young person to develop as they break into this space?
I think just reading and understanding contracts is so undervalued. PPAs, IAs, EPC contracts, O&M contracts. I think it's super valuable when someone can understand all the T's and C's and all those different contracts, how they link together and what that means. I think there's more value there than just being specialized in just data analysis or just financial modeling, because it sets the stage for understanding how our industry works and what the incentives are.
I like that. I haven't had that answer yet. I like that. And speaking of PPA prices, are you seeing things on the rise given all the needs for electrons at data centers and everything else? I assume it's been materially benefit on PPA pricing.
It's been beneficial. It doesn't fully offset the loss of the ITC.
Yeah. But all that open space you got for those batteries might come in handy for that. So how do you see this relationship that exists between investors, developers, and then asset managers? And I know you guys kind of live in a couple of those spaces at the same time. Traditionally, there was a lot of investment through tax equity, and then there started to be a lot of tax credit investment as that incentive came around. In the future, what do you think it looks like for investors who are looking to get in this space and potentially not just be investors, but be asset owners and operators and IPPs is kind of where I'm trying to go towards.
I think that there is a recognition that there's a lot that goes into managing these projects. People thought of it as passive income,
Mm-hmm.
but as a lot of the industry, I mean, virtually every infrastructure investor now has some renewables investment, and they've started to see what goes into it. And so I think that everyone now recognizes you need somebody with a lot of experience being the owner as part of the deal team.
Wholeheartedly agree with that. Brandon, you mentioned you've been in this over 10 years. I know, Steve, you've been in this for quite some time too. If you think 10 years on from now, what do you think you'll look back on and realize from now to 10 years from now that we just didn't predict correctly and we got totally wrong?
I feel like, particularly with a lot of the younger folks that I have that work with me, I think that they view the headwinds that Trump is trying to push our way as more catastrophic than they are. I kind of view this similar to the oil and gas industry, which in my lifetime has had 3 or 4 periods of equal, if not more, headwinds,
Yep.
and they always bounce back. And the oil and gas industry came back strong each time from those bust cycles. I think we will too. I think that this is a couple year slowdown, and then it'll pick back up because, at the end of the day, we turned sunlight into electricity, and that's just really cool.
Well said. There's a few years more of Trump and policy related to his decisions. He's not so penal on all clean energy sources. There's a lot of talk around nuclear, geothermal. As you look out 3 to 5 years from now, what do you think will be the fastest growing energy segment? Will it continue to be PV? Will BESS catch up, or will nuclear or geothermal have a say in the matter?
Well, if you're saying 10 years from now, depends on whether or not you call thermal renewables, because I think that that's going to be the fastest growing segment of new generation in the next 10 years. I don't know enough to put any bets on nuclear. It historically has not worked out for the people that invest in it, typically ratepayers. And I don't think hydrogen is there yet. So if it's not, and geothermal just doesn't have, there's not enough sites available to do it at scale. So I still think it's solar and wind. If you're talking about the next 10 years, if you say 20 years, I have different answers.
Very pragmatic. All right, let's narrow the time horizon. If we just think of 2026, what are either of you most excited about for this year, or what, when you get to the end of this year, will you look back and be like, we had a really successful year because we accomplished this?
We have a lot of pretty exciting things going on. I don't think I can really speak to them yet, but I'd be happy to tell you about it in 2027.
Keeps his cards close to the vest. I love that. All right. Is there a show coming up that you'll be at in person that if any of my listeners are attending, they can look you up at?
Yeah, I'll be in InfoCast. Everyone calls it San Diego, but it's been in Arizona for several years now.
And then AMNA is after that in San Diego in April. I don't know if you'll be there, but hopefully
Steve will.
I'll make sure to say hi, Steve, and invite you to our event. For anyone who won't see you in person and wants to learn more about SolRiver, where's the best place for them to go online?
SolRiverCapital.com.
Awesome. All right, Steve, Brandon, SolRiver Capital, incredible work. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. To my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you on the next episode of The Future Current.